Welcome to the digital podcast that explores how different organizations transform the way they create and capture value with digital technology. Simon, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Panos, good to be here.
It's a real pleasure to have you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your agile leadership ideas. I know you've been doing quite a lot of research and also practicing some of those ideas in your organization as part of your Accenture role. So perhaps just to also tell our audience who you are, maybe you can introduce yourself, what you have done so far, and your role, your current role at Accenture.
Great. Well, great to be here. And I started my career in high tech after doing my MBA here at Manchester in the 80s, and worked for ICL, which became part of Fujitsu, and worked in IT and telecoms for a while, and then moved into consulting, and then set up a consulting business on leadership, focused on leadership, which we sold to Oliver Wyman in 2008, and then set up again with Cirrus in 2010, and sold that to Accenture in 2021. So my career has been a combination of entrepreneurship and leadership development, essentially. And now I'm global head of leadership and culture for Accenture, running the practice that my business has become part of. So we're working with a range of clients around the world doing some really interesting work.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I understand that a lot of the ideas came from your PhD, your DBA research here in Manchester.
Yeah.
And you have 2 books out. I read one. I know you have the Connected Leadership, and then more recently you have the Agile Leadership, which brings together some of the earlier ideas and I guess pushes those ideas forward. So before we get into the concept and the practical applications, I want to know more about the research. Where was the research carried out? Who was involved? You know, how did you test some of those principles?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that the doctorate was a fantastic experience for me because it enabled me, it forced me really to get real depth in my leadership practice, which was fantastic, and it's a very robust program. But I drew on a lot of research into different leadership theories like distributed leadership, or the theory of authentic leadership, complexity leadership theory. My research was a longitudinal study of large organizations that were going through a transition to becoming more agile, more customer-centric, and particularly driven by working in a more digital context. So how did those factors help or hinder the organization's move to becoming more customer-centric, essentially? And the first book, Connected Leadership, came directly out of that because I identified some key factors in leadership which were really the most significant in affecting the rate at which the organization was successful in embracing and transforming itself, driven by digital, to become more customer-centric and more agile.
And these organizations, I assume they were coming from different sectors, right?
Yes, cross-sector.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
There was high tech, there was fast-moving consumer goods, and actually a public sector organization.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And you carried out surveys and I guess interviews with leaders in different levels of those organizations.
Exactly. Yeah. So 2 stages, 12 to 18 months apart, and then different levels in the organization to test intention at the most senior levels and the reality of how that was experienced, particularly amongst middle managers. So that was the target audience, that senior executives through to middle managers, and the way in which the intentions of change were played out in practice, what was hindering that, what was getting in the way, but also what leadership characteristics and cultural aspects really were really accelerating that, were being most helpful. And that led to the Connected Leadership framework.
Yeah. That's great. So what makes an agile leader? What are the key characteristics of agile leadership?
Well, it starts, both in connected and agile. It's foundational is a strong sense of purpose and direction. So I'm a big advocate of leaders having a clear sense of their own purpose, but helping their teams and their organisation be crystal clear about the purpose of the organisation, not just in terms of profit or whatever, but I think that's an outcome which helps you become more effective at delivering on your purpose, but a broader societal purpose, a sense of the role in the world of this organisation, why it's here for its various stakeholders, and also the strategic clarity, the direction that will enable it to accelerate its impact. So once that's clear, then you've got clear purpose and direction, then other attributes come into play. So there's foundational in terms of the culture is establishing a climate of psychological safety where people feel able to challenge, speak truth to power, be honest, and that encourages the level of experimentation, which is about learning and trying and furrows into the unknown and making mistakes to learn, just as James Dyson has famously advocated, which then also leads to then embracing disruptive thinking, which I find, especially in large organisations, is one of the most challenging aspects of agile leadership to embrace, because large organisations typically have a very strong culture about what are the narratives that are predominant, what's accepted and what's valued, and that creates an environment very often where disruption is not welcome, and that can lead to myopia and a lack of agility. And then all of that is underpinned by being really close to the customer and having a strong customer vision. So all of that lays the foundations. And then in terms of execution, we talk a lot about ruthless prioritization. Again, organizations struggle with this. There's a lot of initiatives that go on in our large organizations, which tend to slow everything down. And the more tasks a team have, the less productive it will be. So prioritization is a key agile principle, but also relates to leadership. Coaching and continuous improvement, looking for ways to increase velocity. Agile decision making is grounded in devolving decisions as close to the customer as possible, and then high levels of collaboration. So you put that mix together, you've got the ingredients to create a climate where agility, with a capital A or a small a, can flourish. But there's quite a lot in it.
There's quite a lot in it,
Yeah.
and I must say, as I said, I was reading the book again on over the weekend, the Agile Leadership one. There's a lot in there. The dimensions, the different dimensions of agility that you just mentioned, you can basically break them down into sub principles and sub characteristics. So it's very comprehensive, but at the same time quite complex in a way. So how do you train? How do you develop such leaders? You make a lot of analogies to professional athletes in your book, and I know you're an avid runner yourself. So a lot of it comes from this idea of being disciplined and right, and caring. First, you need to develop yourself before you start to develop others, right? So it's first about the person before it is about teams and organizations, right?
Yeah.
So how do you develop those traits? And maybe you can give us some examples from the organizations that you worked with.
Yeah.
I am sure you come across people that immediately you recognize, oh, he or she are probably great leaders. I can see it immediately. And then there's others that have potential, but maybe the potential needs to be nourished. And then there's others further down the line. I guess there's different levels, right? And you can identify that and then develop those traits as you go along. Maybe you can give us some examples.
Yeah. Well, last week I spent the week with a group of senior executives in a large bank, and some of them described it as life changing. I mean, it was with a group of colleagues as well, but life changing in a way that we helped them reframe their role, because they'd seen their role as predominantly one of control and maintenance. And we had the chief executive come in at one point, and he said, people at this level, there's too many managers, and we need more leaders. And leaders are about change and about decision making, and they're about leading towards something, managers are maintaining. Now, whether you do agree with that or not, the stimulus from the CEO to say we need leaders to step up into a new role, to reframe their role that they are in, and that then leads to the type of realignment of, well, how can I best enable others through my own capability? So the need to, if I reframe my role and see it as really leading change and transformation, how do I need to adjust to become good at that, or really as effective as I can be? And so how do I ruthlessly prioritize? How do I encourage more disruption? How do I push decision making to the right level rather than allowing people to delegate it up to me? All of these, then there was a context for all of that, because the leaders these senior executives were getting their head around the fact that the bank was not in a stasis, it was in a state of transition, and it needed to accelerate that, and they had a key role to play. So to reframe their role first, and then to rethink how to adapt their leadership practice to support that was a helpful sequence, I think.
Yeah. And this idea of the psychological culture, the psychological safety, right? The safety culture, which I think I'm not a leadership scholar, as you know, but I've read probably through my PhD years, I had to read quite a lot of stuff, and one of it was on psychological safety, Amy Edmondson's work. And it's very interesting, especially recently with COVID, right? And this idea that we're being disrupted with this major shock, and we need to build resilience. And but in order to build resilience, we need to feel safe in our work environment. And we need to be psychologically stable to address the needs, not just of our customers, but our own needs, right? Because of the disruption that we're facing. So maybe you can comment on that a little bit. How do leaders respond to those situations, and what's the role of the agile leader in those situations, in creating that psychological safety?
Yes, and it's a concept that's been around since the 50s, in fact. I mean, Amy has made it much more popular, which has been great. But there is an organisational element, a cultural element to psychological safety, and then there's a personal leadership aspect to it. And when Google did their research into top teams and what made them perform as top teams, it came back. A lot of it came back down to the way in which people interacted, and particularly psychological safety. If in a team you've got high levels of trust, safety to challenge, and safety to experiment, then teams can really make progress much more quickly, which is key in Agile. We want our teams to be looking to improve, looking to experiment, looking to work out how to do things more quickly and more effectively. So it's a great foundation. But a lot of it is down to our micro behaviours as leaders. How we react when our judgment is questioned, how we react when somebody says this is not good enough, or somebody comes up with a different idea to our own. So those micro responses are key. So helping leaders to appreciate that and to reframe their view of their role is not always to control and direct, but actually sometimes it's to create a climate where others can take more control and be more directive about the way in which the team can improve. That stepping back or stepping in, that ability to adjust becomes really key, which is what emotional intelligence, of course, is aiming to support as well. So there's the organisational context of Boeing is a classic example that's in the public domain about the fatal crashes with the 737 MAX aircraft. A fundamental culture in Boeing existed where people didn't feel able to alert the system, the senior leadership, about problems with the software in the new software for the aircraft, which led to the aircraft being rushed out and the control system being flawed. So it's partly about individual behaviour, but also as in the context of a wider organisational culture of do we want to encourage people to pull the Andon cord, like in Toyota, say that there is a problem, we need to stop, And Toyota is a great example of an organisation where they nurture safety, a feeling of safe, to challenge and be honest and so on. Or do we want to suppress that in the interest of getting something out? And the latter is dangerous.
Yeah. The role of teams in Agile leadership is important. And as you say, if those teams are enabled, if there's devolved decision making, to use your terms, down the hierarchy or the distributed teams across the organization, then they take ownership and responsibility of the difficult decisions that need to be made in order to address disruption, whatever that disruption is, right? It could be an emergency situation like the Boeing example. It could be disruption that is, brought in externally, like the COVID-19, but also institutional disruption, right? That customer demands or competition in the market, etc. And that's where you want your teams to act effectively and efficiently without having someone, a leader, to always be in control, always having to worry about everything. And I mean, it's impossible, right?
Yeah.
So what is the role what is the role of teams in nurturing Agile leadership, and vice versa?
Yeah.
How do Agile leaders nurture teams?
Yeah. Well, it's teams are, I think, are becoming the key organizational construct. You know, the emphasis on teams in terms of team leadership, team performance, team reward, team formation of teams, and the ability to bring cross-functional teams together, for example, is a key, is becoming more and more significant in the way organizations are thinking about how they organize their workforce, especially as we're working more and more complex and uncertain times. And we did some great research here at Manchester Business School, me and some others, before and during COVID, which identified that for the teams that were more embracing agile ways of working, their productivity and performance remained more constant during those early months of COVID, and continued through into the later stages of the COVID crisis, because the agile ways of working gave them a routine and a mutual accountability, which, whether they were working in an office together or whether they were working from home, they could maintain that rhythm and the routines of good practice, which stood them in good stead. And you know, that research has identified certain characteristics of agile teams, and we've developed a measure which is fabulous for that, around iterative planning, customer focus, and devolved decision making, but also the importance of leadership and culture. So we use measures of leadership and proxies for leadership for organizational culture, and looked at how those correlated with team performance. And there was a very strong link between empowering leadership, high levels of good quality relationships between leaders and their teams, and also cultures of fairness and transparency. And you look at Netflix, and they've grown successfully partly because of their culture of radical candor and high levels of devolved decision making into the international operations. So they in some ways personify what we're describing here, and all of that led to higher perceived levels of team performance, individual performance, and engagement. So if leaders are shifting and they're creating and supporting teams that are empowered to make decisions about how they achieve their goals, you know, there needs to be an organizational way of structuring work so that it's coordinated clearly. Yeah. And the strategic decisions need to be made at the right level. But teams who are able to say, well, this is what we can achieve in this period, and it's in line with the organizational priorities, are much more productive than at getting that work done.
Mm-hmm. So I'm very much interested in how technology can support the types of things that you're talking about, and agile ways of working. Yeah.
Well, one example is with a major UK utility, where Accenture is actually working on the technology and the restructuring associated with becoming more agile. And our team started working with the leaders all the way from the C-suite through to the frontline team leaders, with various agile principles around psychological safety and encouraging experimentation, but particularly around this shift from controller to coach. So all about performance improvement, but in a way that was supportive of a more empowered workforce, which led to a greater emphasis on the context here was that utility was pretty near the bottom of the rankings in terms of customer experience. By creating an environment where people were encouraged to resolve customer issues using technology as well as their common sense, we enabled the organisation to reduce its customer complaints by 30% in an 18-month period. And there was, yes, technology was involved in that, different structures of work were involved in that, but predominantly it was about the shift in culture and the leadership practice to encourage people to not to get customers off the call as quickly as possible, but to seek to resolve the issue. And that was transformational, both in the customer experience and the performance of the organisation. Another example is Accenture, where I now work, which is one of the world's leading technology and outsourcing organisations. But the reason it is acquired Cirrus and has acquired other companies in this space is because they recognise that to help their clients get true value from major investments in technology, it's the leadership and it's the people and the teams and the culture that makes the real difference. And that's what really accelerates value realisation. It's what accelerates adoption of new ways of working to make technology successful. And if you lead, and one large bank came back after a couple of years to us, and I'd said to them, if you don't deal with leadership, your investment in agile working with a capital A is going to be suboptimal. They came back 18 months later and said, you're right, we have not achieved what we wanted to achieve, and the big problem is our leaders don't understand it, and therefore they're inadvertently cutting across what we're trying to do. So well, but let's address. We can address that, because leaders are not deliberately slowing the business down. They're not deliberately stopping process improvement or adoption of technology. They're just doing what they've previously done. So let's help them reframe their role, learn new skills, and embrace agile ways of working, so they can be accelerators of it rather than inhibitors. And again, it's about accelerating value, but it works.
Yeah. And I am sure I've seen that too many times. The technology has great potential, but if the leaders behind the adoption of that technology do not understand it, then it diffuses across the organization. That unclarity, that confusion diffuses across the organization.
Yeah.
And that's you mentioned prior to starting the podcast that one of the things that you disagree with is that when people say that there's a lot of resistance to change. Well, in fact, it's not resistance; it's about not understanding the change.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't personally. And based on what I've seen, I don't think people are predisposed to resist change per se. I think it's the way change is introduced. If it's an imposition, if people feel a lack of agency and control, they feel as if they are being made to do something, they're more likely to resist it. If they understand why it's important, if they're buying into and involved in deciding how to implement it, then they're much more likely to embrace it and make it work, which means that technology adds more value, that customers get better service, whatever the outcomes are you're seeking. Involve people. It's not difficult, but very often we keep things secret. Changes are released at the last minute. There's a massive sense of imposition, and people naturally react to that. Yeah.
So, what are some of the barriers to agile leadership?
Well, there are four main ones we focus on, and this resonates with most of our clients. And the first, and perhaps the biggest, is a culture of risk aversion. And we see, particularly in large incumbent organisations where they have a significant market share, they've been around for a long time, the risk aversion creeps in and becomes endemic to the organisation. So risk aversion is central to stopping Agile really deliver value, because a change in the risk appetite and taking intelligent risks with proportionate risks, with a strong sense of materiality, is an important aspect of Agile. You need to be able to take risks, intelligent risks, to learn, to expand, to accelerate outcomes. So risk appetite is massive. Then the second one, which goes back to your previous point, is about clarity of roles and goals. Is everybody clear about the role they play and how it fits into the organization's objectives? So OKRs are a great way to share that understanding of, in this team, I understand how the work we're doing contributes to the broader objectives and key results of the division and of the organization. That clarity, when it's missing, is a key barrier, because people don't know how to interact effectively because they're not sure about roles and responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And then there's distance from the customer, which again is a big challenge in large organizations, because the larger an organization it becomes, the more it tends to look inward to run itself, and the rules become very significant. So a distance from customer. And then the last one is about silos. Silo busting has been around since the 80s in terms of that famous HBR article. But silos are still very predominant in a lot of clients we work with. They slow things down, especially on an end-to-end process view, and they're tribal, and they tend to lead to internal levels of competition, and are deeply unhelpful if you want to put agile ways of working into practice. So collaboration, therefore, building from the individual team to multiple teams to across functional areas, working in cross-functional ways is obviously a key factor of agile as well. That requires the dismantling of the fiefdoms and the power domains of senior leaders, which makes that difficult, but it's essential if you want to really have enterprise agility rather than localized pockets of agility, which is what often we see.
Yeah, and this is actually true for IT implementation or digital technology implementation. One of the great barriers is siloed teams.
Yeah.
And again, the agile methods that you mentioned, the mechanisms are the same exactly for developing agile ways of deploying technology. It's exactly the same. So it does come down to how teams work and whether leaders are able to devolve that responsibility and enable collaboration and interaction between them.
Yeah.
Which organizations are more likely to struggle to implement agile leadership principles? How do you, when you walk into an organization and you realize you are faced with that situation, what do you do? What is your advice? What is your guidance?
I think, I can think of one or two current examples, but often it boils down to how power is perceived. We talk about a lot of leadership research suggests that the heroic leader is a flawed model, but there are still a lot of organizations that are very successful that have a very heroic leadership style. The CEO and the C-suite members are the heroes. They're the people that have sold the most or have launched the biggest products or whatever. The ego is a significant player here. So you walk into an organization where there's a strong emphasis on the hero, we know that's going to be a problem, because for very senior people to reframe their role is very challenging, but not impossible. And then the other aspect tied to that is hierarchy. Now, the stronger the hierarchy, the stronger the sense of deference to authority, and the more real agile and agile at scale will struggle. So you tend to get pockets, little islands of agility, often in DevOps in type environments, which is fine, but obviously it's suboptimal. So it's fine for them, but they will typically find it quite frustrating that the rest of the organisation is not working at a similar cadence to the way they want to. Funding, for example, is annual rather than more iterative. So you can get pockets, but to make that into more of an enterprise agility is a massive shift. And I think power is at the heart of it, and the ability for senior leaders to embrace a different approach and to let go. We talk about eyes on, hands off. You know, the sense of, yes, I know what's going on, and I've set up the clarity of strategy and purpose. We're very clear about where we're going, but I'm not going to get involved in the micro decisions about how we implement that. You know, that's quite a big shift for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. So I appreciate that agile transformation with new digital technologies requires trust, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess trust is also quite important with any organizational change program. More so with digital technology, because of a lot of the fear. I mean, especially recently, you know, with ChatGPT and the fear that it's going to take over. A lot of people will lose their jobs, and I mean, this fear of automation has been around since the last 20 years or so, right? But you know, how do you develop trust in the technology to enable a lot of the things that you mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Trust is foundational to an organisation working in a healthy way. I think there's, we've had various industrial revolutions, and each of them has involved a lot of change. And undoubtedly, AI and machine learning and so on will again trigger a lot of change, and some roles will be automated. But what we see is the need to bring humanity back into to the heart of organisations, so that they are the ability for human beings to evolve and to become partners with technology and collaborators with technology becomes more and more important, and not seeing it as a threat, but as an opportunity to automate and free up time to do more important, more critical, more innovative activity. It's a positive replacement when that time can be used for more innovation. But clearly there will be an impact on many individuals as roles are automated. So I think there's a realism that leaders need to embrace about what is happening, as I think some organisations are now starting to announce. But also recognition that if you save money here, that money can be reinvested over here. And I think what saddens me is the short-term nature of some savings, which it's seen as that we just need to give those savings back to shareholders, rather than reinventing the organisation and investment in the future of the organisation in terms of its innovation and role in society. And I think the organisations that have that willingness to invest in the future will win.
Yeah. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because one way to break free from those hierarchical modes and the controlling modes of organizational management, right, is exactly to innovate with technology, to devolve responsibility, to distribute decision making, which I think comes with a lot of it can come with technology, and it can be enabled by technology. But as you say, there's work that needs to take place behind the scenes prior to achieving that. So another topic that is very close to my heart is how do we achieve digital transformation across ecosystems? A lot of organizations now are working in partnership with others, because obviously they don't have all the capabilities, they don't have all the resources. It's a disruptive market, whichever sector you are. I mean, there's quite a lot of recognition that organizations cannot manage this disruption on their own. They need to partner. They need to work collaboratively with other organizations. The same way that you have teams working with different teams and you want to avoid silos, similar to organizations, you want to avoid organizational silos, right? So how do you implement the principles of agile leadership across organizations? I guess this is something that maybe this is a topic for future research, I guess. But But I've seen quite a lot on agile leadership within organizations, but I haven't seen too much across organizations.
No, it's a very interesting area, and as you say, further research opportunities. But I think we just take clarity, client focus, and collaboration as three aspects of agile working that are particularly relevant. And since I've joined Accenture in the last 2 years, I've been incredibly impressed with their ability to work in partnership with organisations with which they also compete. You know, it's a strategic intent of Accenture to partner, to work with those ecosystem partners, some of which are some of the world's biggest IT software companies, for example. But to those partnership needs to be based on that. First of all, clarity around what are we seeking to achieve here? What are our roles? And then that suggests ways of working that we can share. Focusing on the customer at all times. You know, what is the client really looking for, and how can the best of Accenture and the best of whether it's Microsoft or Google or whoever, how can that come together to deliver that customer value? And then this collaboration is just a long-term perspective. Because if we were competitors and I ask you to compete, to collaborate with me on something, but you don't think I've got a long-term perspective on that, your level of trust and therefore investment is going to be reduced. Whereas if you think, no, we've got a real long-term perspective on this and we'll see this through together to the benefit of the clients, but also to our mutual benefit, then I'm more willing to invest in that because I have confidence in the long-term nature of your intent. So I think there are principles of agile leadership that apply in that ecosystem management, but it has to be a long-term game, because if confidence is at the heart of it, really. So if we've got clarity and collaboration, but driven by confidence, we can focus on what the client needs and do something better than other competitors who might not be so adept at this working in an ecosystem and bringing the best of multiple parties to bear to solve a really complex problem.
So it's about creating joint value propositions with your partners, even though they may also be your competitors.
Absolutely.
Further down the line.
Yeah.
But that joint value proposition enables you to go to market, to serve customer needs, to meet customer needs much more effectively, much more productively, potentially much more profitably.
Yes.
But then you need that clarity of vision between the different leaders of the different organizations.
Yes. Yes.
To come together and agree, right, on common governance rules. Again, going back to your ideas of devolved decision making, prioritizing parts of the delivery, the implementation, the innovation, etc. That has to be jointly agreed.
Yeah. As
opposed to decided individually within a single organization.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm watching really a strategic partnership that Accenture has with another organization that's just starting. I'm seeing it evolve in real time, but the commitment to it is explicit. The long-term nature of it is explicit. The way in which Accenture and this partner are bringing value to the market and to clients is explicit, and the people in it are also they're building the confidence to be really challenging of each other, as you would in a good team. Don't hold back. Let's talk. Let's get to a better solution by having a disagreement. That's what we're seeing in this partnership as it plays out, because the people in it have the confidence that it's long term, that it's substantial, and there's absolute intent. And when we're working in partnership, we would not do the wrong thing by each other or by the client. So it's actually great to see.
My last question, as global lead for leadership and culture at Accenture, what's your vision for the future in terms of agile leadership, especially as we are moving into a future that is quite uncertain, right? The large language models, generative AI, are, as we said earlier, disrupting the way organizations operate. So what's your vision of the future, and where does agile leadership play into that?
Well, I think the principles of agile per se describe as a way of working that is, I think, truly inspiring if you really do it well. And it is about teamwork and trust and cross-functional working and mutual respect and dissent and prioritization. So all these principles, I think, are really powerful to move forward. But I think what's at the heart of it, from my perspective, is that we don't get lost in the technology and we don't get lost in the process, but that we keep a strong emphasis on the humanity and the human. It's a human process, human system, well, a human and machine system nowadays. But keeping hold of that sense of humanity and the principles that Agile leadership, I think, encapsulates is going to be really important. And I'd extend that to say, I think, going back to purpose, I think organisations are still getting their collective heads around what does purpose really mean, and to what extent are we really investing in the communities in which we operate, the planet on which we work, and our people, as well as driving for financial success. And I think I'd like to see that more front and centre of organisational thinking in the future. So yeah, purpose writ large and humanity in the way we work, I think would be great to see that continue to develop.
Simon, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Panos, thank you.